throw it in the chat so people can see. Beep, 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 beep.
I also, speaking of fantasy writers, I do enjoy Rick Riordan's work too.
Sorry, who?
Rick Riordan.
Oh, Rick Riordan.
Oh yeah, Jan has some books.
Yeah. Like the Percy Jackson series was actually pretty good.
Well, and world building
Magnus Chase as well.
The cool thing, like, just to go back to different foreign lands, is it can, just like even gods can allow for such interesting design spaces. If you decide to go to an area like, for example, for me in one of my books, Earth is essentially, no one's been to Earth for years because they basically made it like an intergalactic reserve, not reserve, park, like a national park, so that it could like restore itself, and eventually after thousands of years they go back to Earth and they lift the ban and there's humans there and they've actually built our civilization and it's actually us in modern times. So for us, it's not science fiction, and what we see are these aliens, but in reality they're not aliens, they are humans from thousands of years ago that just left Earth. And the aliens that we've seen over our periods were just park rangers. Humans that would just come to Earth to see how Earth was doing. And that's a short story I wrote once.
That sounds cool.
It is. It was an interesting design space.
Honestly, I've heard that theory anyways, and you kind of like thoughts, so that makes it more believable.
So
I was gonna write comics to some degree. I had thought of when I was younger. I wanted to do like a prophet kind of like alien. I don't know why I drew. I didn't get a chance to do much. I just kind of like drew like a title comic page that I was gonna just start going off of. I'm like, just like drew a picture and let's see where we can go with. And I made like a Jesus alien kind of thing, and then I'm like, well, what is this? What is this story about? I started kind of like trying to figure out how to make a comic out of it. But I did like 4 or 5 pages, I think, when I had started it, but I never finished it. That's
a good segue. Speaking of your Jesus alien, so you didn't really know where you were going with that. It just kind of ended up like that. So when you're writing a story and world building, I kind of touched on this at the beginning, but I'd like to hear more from everyone about it. When you think of your story and you think of the beginning, middle, and end, do you insert that into your world, or is that a focus of your world? So for writing, it's usually the focus. It's really hard to kind of unfocus it, but does and then for DMing, it's a bit different because you don't know where it's ending. You understand what you've set up as the end, but it may not be how you get there. So it'd be interesting to hear, because how I do it is when I write my stories, I never know how they're going to end. I have the beginning and I have certain events, like certain things that will happen, set up as a structure. And then my goal is to write those, to write to there, because then my characters might develop in a different way than I initially thought. I like to have a very fluid style in that sense, so that when my ending comes, although I have some sense of what the ending should be, I can more curtail it to make it feel natural for my characters. I even do this in DMing. I have a certain set of endings that I kind of visualize, but depending on how my players play, I will morph it and I will let it be fluid until they get to that point, and then I will curtail it to basically how they developed. Why don't we start with Sara, if she's still there?
I think she's on the screen right now.
I think she froze. Yeah. Let's move over to Andrew then, or Insanieac.
Repeat what you were going to say for a second. I lost my thought.
So when you think about world building, or you think about your main characters, is it easier for you?
Oh, okay, right, yeah. I remember. Yeah. So for me, I've built, when I started kind of like building, I had like key kind of like concept events that I wanted to happen. and then I built around that. I honestly didn't. I haven't had an ending kind of like built in my mind. I have essentially a cataclysm to start the ending, but I haven't really figured out what that ending's going to be.
Yep.
Yeah. Did I not say catalyst? But so, like, I have like a big event that I have planned for near the end, and it's supposed to spark other things or leave it at a cliffhanger. I wasn't quite sure yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I had other things that I made along the way. Like, for me, it's certain, like I said, it's certain, like, kind of like what you said, certain events that are like key world changing kind of things. But it's also for a DM, it's more kind of like depending on how people react to it, right? And stories and things like that. So, like, if someone's doing something, I can guess because I know my players a little bit, but at the same time, I'm not going to be able to like know for sure what exactly is going to happen.
What about
something blows, like when a town blows up, to say the least.
What about my south? What about the Grease Goblin? How do you can you hear me?
Yeah.
So how do you evolve around your main characters, your protagonists, as it were?
Again, honestly, winging it seems to be the best way to go.
That's just kind of your thing, I think.
No forethought whatsoever. All right.
Like, the general setup, and then I wing it with where they to go.
Good for you. Sarah, you back?
I am. I don't know what's going on. I'm having real internet issues.
Well, look, I'll try to get you while you're still here then. So did you hear my question? Do you want
I
me
heard,
to...
I think, half of it.
So basically what I was asking is your world more fluid based on what your characters are doing in your stories? Or is it more... Do you build your world based on the story? So do you have the beginning, middle, and end planned out and then world build from there? Or do you world build and insert the story within?
World build and insert the story within. I built this world in like 2011. I started building it. And the story came in 2015, and then from there. Yeah, I build the world. I love world building. And I do love writing the stories too. World building is really my passion. There certainly is a lot of flexibility in the world, though, that like I can write the story and find, for the story I need this, so that now this is a part of the world. So there's a little bit of flexibility. I definitely the world for it.
And then Jeremy. I mean, I'm sure I know what you're going to say, but I'd like to hear you how you vision things.
How I envision things.
So when you first let's talk more. Let's curtail yours a bit. When you first started DMing and first started participating players in your world, did you have a beginning, middle, and end set up, and then just followed the books or built the world around them, or did you build the world and then have your players inside it?
Or build events based around.
So yeah, kind of like my normal style, right? Like I started on a base thing, and then we just completely like set fire to that world right away. I started in Eberron, believe it or not, was my very first campaign.
Rising from the Last War or the original?
The original, the Last War, right
sense.
as it starts. We started in the unclaimed province of Dargun, which is in the southern, like middle southern of the continent, because it was like a lawless, like barbaric lands, and it was generally, if you read through the lore of it, there was no lore because it was ruled by orcs and goblins. So that way we could start with no lore, throw our own characters stuff on top, and then, to be honest, we started in a so the 3.5 universe had a book called Traps, like I think it was like Traps and Challenges or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And in there they had, if you've ever seen the movie Cube, they had the rules for your own dungeon based around cube. And the idea is if you say, so picture a giant prison, but each of the cells are a cube on a Rubik's Cube.
Oh, cube! I thought you were saying cube.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, cube. Yeah, totally.
Right?
Yeah.
So they have rules in there for that, for a giant prison based around like a Rubik's Cube.
That's cool.
And I started my players in that, and then I had a BBEG that I played around, and that was what I used.
Really interesting as a thing to try it as one shot.
The hypercube.
Yeah, the hypercube started.
The hypercube would be cool.
Everyone's by themselves, and you had nothing to start with.
That's what it was. It was a giant Rubik's Cube, and then some of the cubes actually held their items, their starting items.
I don't know why you're like skilled in these things, but you find why you can do certain things.
All of the players didn't even start with all of their starting items, right? They had to try and get them through this thing, and then on top of that, I put like dimension hopping creatures they're called ethereal filters. The creature is literally meant to jump into the reality, steal your items, and then run away.
Yeah.
That's nice.
So they had to not only find their gear, but then they also had to try and keep their gear from these creatures. Okay. And then they had to try and find each other and get out of this cube. And it was like a really good way to like start a campaign where we had evil and good players in the party, and shenanigans broke out. And
so you're definitely more fluid. So okay, so we'll wrap up with one more question, and we'll go around the table. The last part of world building, at least I look at, that seems to be definitely the most important, at least one of the most important things, is villains. Name the talk show. But if your villains aren't compelling, there's no point building a world, because like no one's gonna read your shit or want to play your shit if your villains aren't compelling. I'll answer, and then I'll start with Jeremy, and then I'll answer last about how I do it. But I guess the question would be more in terms of your villains. Do you plan for your villains? Do your villains shape as your characters or your players slowly go through your world? Or
absolutely. So I'll explain. Okay. So the first one I had was we were in Dark Gun, and I completely wiped the lore clean, right? And I had their capital city is technically ruled by orc chieftains. But I had all the chieftains wiped out, and none of the players knew why, but it was ruled by a single human. His name was Arick, Arick. Mm-hmm. And he was actually the secret bad guy. He was a Night Stalker, which is like a super powerful like Shadowfell creature.
Okay.
Living inside of his skin, he had taken over. He's like a skinwalker, basically.
Okay.
So I kind of combined the lore of a skinwalker with these Night Stalkers, right? The only way he could exist in the material plane was by walking around in this human skin. And he hired the players to do a bunch of tasks for him, which resulted in them breaking down this tower so that he could break out of his skin and combine his plane with this province, and then slowly start taking over the material plane. And over time, like, because he hired them and he had sent them to death missions a couple times, to the point where he had been impressed by them and actually started to send them on missions and decide whether he wanted to keep them or not. Okay. Almost like pets, right? Because he was like a really powerful. I think they were like CR-17 or something, or CR-18. Yeah, pretty much, right?
Minions are always good.
Go support our Patreon.
Yeah, become a minion from the Minion Hub.
Become a minion today for the Villains Talk Show.
Or if you don't want to, or just get the
Nightwalker. Sorry, not Night Stalker, Nightwalker.
But yeah, okay. So you're definitely more your villains evolve. So let's go to Sara.
Villain.
Tell us how you build your villains.
I build my villain. I feel like it's a little tricky. Oh, did I? I also just stopped talking. have been that.
Oh, okay. It might have been that.
I feel like it's tricky.
5 seconds of silence, Sarah. You know that rule?
You guys totally can't.
I can hear you.
A robot?
Caden is a robot.
Do I sound like a
I am
robot?
No, you
No, you
don't.
don't.
You're fine.
Nope, you're good.
I'm good? Okay. We're having problems here. So far, I've only actually built one of the villains that I'm going to have. And it's definitely by far the least interesting. It's the biggest bad guy of the whole thing, but it's by far the least villain. The ones that are going to come later are related to the story much more closely. How did I build them, though? I don't know. I just sort of dreamed them up. I just sat around and was like, what would make a good story? Ooh, this would. Horrifying and sad.
So you would say
sad.
So you would say you build your villains and the world is just kind of around them. Whether you've built the world or not, you just kind of put the villains in the world for the art of the story, is what you're telling me. Oh.
No.
Okay.
The big villain is a big part of the world. It is like force of evil and darkness and chaos, right? So it was built into the world from.
You kind of cut out there. But I was going to say...
I don't know.
That means you have 2 gods.
Sort of, yeah. A god and a god.
All right, so let's keep moving down the line. Mr. Goblin, how do you portray or build your villains?
Usually I would introduce the villain like right off the bat, and then hope they don't die right away.
Because you blow your load too early?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Blow your load a little too early, buddy.
Everything is planned.
It's okay. One in every 40 guys have that problem.
You blow your load just a little early, bud.
Everything is planned.
Just a little early, bud.
Everything is planned, is it?
Yeah.
How much before
is
time
it?
is there?
How
Planning?
planned is it? Planned about 5 seconds ahead, is it?
No, 20 seconds. Come on, give me some credit.
Give you 10. I'll give you 10.
I think we are giving you credit.
No, 20 seconds, and then I'd go with that.
I believe in you kidding.
I believe that you don't think more than 20 seconds ahead.
Yeah.
All right.
Sounds about right.
Let's move down. Insaniac. You are a villain, so what, do you just reflect everything as passive aggressively as you do?
Believe it or not, I'm actually a pretty nice person.
I do.
You are?
But
Passive aggressive.
It's because I've had to be. I could be more aggressive, but then people don't react very well.
But then you're not passive.
Thank you, John. That's what happens when you put aggressive without the passive.
That's exactly what he just said.
So, how do you build your villains?
I was going to say it. So that depends on how you look at things. Where if you're looking at it, I have my villains, but then I have antagonists to some degree.
Yeah.
I have.
Thank you.
It would seem as a villain for my party, perhaps, but I have what I'd like to think is an antagonist, which is essentially I tried to make like a Thanos kind of like lich that was essentially like two of the party members was supposed to be like Gamora and Nebula, and one of the things actually in that note of things just kind of worked out. I wanted to figure out a way to make them have that relationship kind of like a little bit of like a spark between each other, and they did it on their own, which was really surprising. But I had a few things that kind of made it in there, but the character is made to seem more like a villain, but he's more meant to antagonize the party and kind of spark certain things in certain directions. But then I have villains where I have...
You're going to have to define antagonist and villain, because in my mind, those are the same thing.
No, that's
Well,
right.
an antagonist doesn't always believe what he's doing is wrong.
Exactly. Or is not trying to do things...
Right, if
I
just like
guess,
crazy old Maurice, for example, right? He doesn't believe he's evil.
Because he's
He's
not.
more of an antagonist.
He's just
The
furthering a
antagonist is the
cause.
person- the
Even if it's not a good
antagonist is the person
cause.
who's
I get
working
it.
against
Everyone's the
protest.
hero of their own story. I got
Right?
it.
So he's
It's not
more-
necessarily true either, though. some people know they're the villain. Like, I guess Two-Face's quote is the best on that one, right? You either die the hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Yeah.
Or was that Arthur Dent?
Anyways,
I don't know by that time.
Please continue.
So, like, the character I've made more is the antagonist. It's called, like, he's like the Dreadlord, and he's supposed to be like he's trying to further himself as like a pope, essentially, as like a rich
How
king
original.
in the city. Thank you. It's great. I know, right? Did I mention I named the city the ruins of Angmar? Originality at its key. Anyways, he's not really trying to like. He's not counter against the party, and he's not trying to cause like issues with the party. He's doing his own thing, and with it brings friction to like the protagonists. But I've had villains that are actively trying to oppose the party, that have been tasked with doing such, and have gone out of the way to steal artifacts, or to influence their meetings, or like ruin their times and cause direct confrontation with them. Where I've had where this one character I've made, he's supposed to be the bad guy, but he's not. He's also a type of antagonist. He's not a villain, but he hires villains. He wants people that are confronting these people because it makes them take longer to stop him, the swords, to achieve his goal. But these villains that are coming in, I'd say it's more like the brains of the operation versus the henchmen. The villains I see more as they have their own goals and they're facilitating direct confrontation, whereas the antagonist also has his own goals, but it's not directly confronted. But it has moments that bring and antagonize it, right? Moments that are frictional, but not direct. Like, I'm going to kill you and I want to murder your family and things like that. More like,
tension.
Hey,
the tension runs
I'm
high.
changing. Yeah, I'm trying to change politics and maybe this isn't cool or something like that. You know,
I got it.
Something like that. And so, like, I've had villains that have literally like started the whole fight and like caused a bunch of different things. I actually used one of my previous characters to come in and start as a villain and cause a fight between essentially the party and their quest giver, because they weren't being forthright, because they're villains. They had learned about other members and they were keeping things. So I had a character that had actually rolled really well on trying to follow them, kidnapped one of their prospects, and then as they were going to report, brought it in and threw it on their quest giver's kind of lap, and had to fight all of the party at the same time, and like almost kicked some ass, but then got his ass kicked because that's what his job was to do, to some degree. He called for backup. He had a wyvern mount which showed up and started fighting the party. So it ended up being an interesting fight, and it had certain payoffs. And because this character, they didn't know too much about it and they didn't catch him, they spent a lot of time trying to figure out who this guy really was and where did he came from, what his exact intentions was. And then they learned he was connected to the antagonist. So it kind of answered a number of those questions at the same time of why this guy's here, what he's doing. But it also had a few other people hinted in. Like I have a couple of villains, but I have a few antagonists. But it depends on the quest.
But so you would say you evolve, like your villains are fluid, so you kind of insert them as it goes, rather than, because like going on to me, like what I do is whenever I write a story, even when I'm DMing, the one thing I do write, and the one thing I will write, not the entire arc of, because I'll never write the full end, but what I will do is write the entire villain. I'll never write the actual protagonist, but the antagonist in my stories, I take a lot of care. I find it can in my opinion, it can ruin or make a story, or it can ruin or make a game if you don't have a villain with the right motivations. And
I was going to say the first Dungeons and Dragons movie is an example of that.
There's a movie?
I've never seen it, actually.
They're not.
Jeremy Irons plays such a compelling bad guy.
But okay, I might want to watch that, actually. But yeah,
it's like Will Wheaton and one of the Wayans, Marlon Wayans, are the main characters.
There's a few good actors in it, but like
anyway, but you understand what I'm trying to say. Like, it in my mind, like especially when I write, I need a compelling villain, and I need their arc at least maybe if I don't write the end and how if they're going to succeed or fail, that I'll leave up. That I won't write till I get there because I want to see how the story evolves. But I need my villain to be compelling. Like if I'm going to make them intelligent, I need to write intelligent twists that actually are intelligent. Because there's so many times you read something in a book and it's like, "Oh, this was a trap." And you're like, "Okay, but you wasted way more resources than you needed to setting up some stupid elaborate trap that doesn't even work." So I mean, you write it for the adventure and the payoff, but at the same time, I find that in some of the pieces that are considered great works of fiction or science fiction or fantasy, you have the payoff or you have the villain be way more compelling. Like the villain, one of the biggest arguments in Lord of the Rings is the villain isn't Saruman, it isn't Sauron, it isn't the fucking Balrog, it isn't the orcs. The villain is the ring.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's such a compelling villain because it doesn't do anything. It really
But does
doesn't.
it, though?
It turns you invisible.
Right? Like,
It attracts demons towards you and horrible things. But that's the first book. After that, Frodo doesn't put it on. And it's such a compelling villain. And it's such a crazy design space to write a villain that really has no lines. No lines.
See, the one thing that
But look at
I
the
found
effects.
was like,
and so
the one thing I found with my villains to some degree is because I made my space evil characters facing off against evil characters. So villains in an antagonist in a way kind of change based on perspective, and which kind of, especially in the way of players and you're doing your DMing, or it depends. It becomes relative to the choices that the party makes, because so this dude might be a villain, now, but maybe if you do different things and change it, he could be a supporter or an ally. Right? But that depends. In a writing space, you have a lot more planning stage, you have a lot more filling out and figuring out where you're taking that story, right? So a villain becomes a lot more fleshed out, and you can see where you're going with it eventually, right?
So I'll open the floor for final thoughts. Any final thoughts, Andrew or Insaniac, on world building?
I wish I was better at it.
So do I. What about you, Mr. Goblin?
Yeah, I wish I was better and I didn't procrastinate as much.
How about south of the board?
Me?
I believe you're south.
Final thoughts about world building? I have so many thoughts about building.
The floor is yours.
I love it.
Pretend you're telling someone about world building who has no idea what we're talking about.
I love being able to create stories and people and entire reality. All of my that it follows the rules that I want it to follow, but it can grow and create a life and be its own thing. I think it's just fascinating that something can start in someone's head and it can spread around the world. Like, look at The Lord of the Rings. That started in Tolkien's head, and yet you can see Frodo and people everywhere will know what you... And I just think that's incredible and exciting.
That's kind of my favorite part about world building to some degree. Not because, like, for me it's a difference. Like, I like world building, but I love experiencing other people's worlds. I like learning about what drives characters. I like seeing I'm a sucker for happy endings, and I cry sometimes, whatever. It's these things, that the stories that you build with people and things, it's moving and it's relative, and it teaches people every day new things, and building a great world for that helps support I'd say, like, progression in our society of social things that we can't always do, through talking to people, your learning experiences and stuff like that.
Yeah, it does.
It's helpful.
It's exciting, really. It's just exciting to think that this thing that started in my mind, it could grow and it could become something all of its own. Yeah.
And I love experiencing that personally. That's my favorite, seeing somebody's whole mind process they put either into book, into game, into movie, into whatever various forms, and seeing that whole thought process, that effort that you put into it. It's so gratifying to see that effort. When somebody really cares about it and actually wants to do it and has made a lot for it, it's you can tell it's great,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
And you use such amazing stories. You get things where people talk about it all the time, right? Our whole world is kind of built on stories to some degree, right? Games,
It
movies,
absolutely
and
is.
media all kind of function a lot of our most of our lives, right?
Yeah.
And we all tell our own stories at gossip and work or in games
Exactly.
and other things, right?
What I would say to that, just to add on, because that's all great, would be
That's all great.
When
Thanks,
it-
John.
well, it is. No, it is. It's all great.
I know. I'm just kidding.
Is the only thing I would add on is don't be scared to put in events that your characters or your players or whoever will never hear about. Don't
Absolutely.
don't be scared
Yeah.
to fill in stuff that you may never touch on, and never throw out something. Just put it somewhere else. The thing about a world or a reality or a realm or whatever is they're so big, they're so vast. A lot of people get lost in the scope. Kind of like it's called what is it? The map paradox. Like when you look at a map, you think, and you look at a coast and another coast, they're right beside each other. You're like, oh, those are so close. But in
they're not.
reality, there's so much in
The
between,
macro and micro kind of.
and there's and there's so much there. And to even move like 500 feet, you could have so much, and it all depends on how densely populated. So don't be. And it's not about having to hit everything. It's more for, because some things won't work, and so you put it in the background. And always write from a point where it starts the most creatively for you, is what I always found. I can always write more, and I always get more done if I start from points where I know my creativity seems to go. So villains. I always like to write a villain first, and then I build a world around them. Something else is I'll hear something, or I'll watch an action, and I'll build a world around it. It's and I just sometimes I insert it in other worlds. Sometimes it's left in my binder. You have to be willing to just let it all mesh.
Absolutely.
And Jeremy, anything else?
I'd have to agree pretty much with what you have to say, right? Like, never throw something away that you might come back to it later, or you can use it somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I've always loved like world building. Start with like a single location and slowly expanding out. That's how we started this campaign, right? Well, on a tiny island, and now you guys know about at least half of the islands in your current territory.
And if not other places.
Yeah, and then I like to add, of course, other pre-existing places too, because it's nice to be able to go somewhere and not have to create everything myself from the base, even though I've done most of it.
Well, in saying that, I'd like to thank everyone watching. I'm sorry you had nothing better to do, but I'm glad you spent it here. I'm C4. Beside me is Insanieac. Further down is the great Grease Goblin. Below me is Sara, Vike, and to my opposite is Sir Jeremy, and we are the Villains Talk Show. And thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Yes,
Sure
thank
to
you.
check out Patreons and stuff all over social
Yeah.
media.
Yes, just
follow, all that
likeness.com.
stuff.
Get the likeness app. There's also a Patreon, the Minion Hub, if you wish to,
And
give a.
my local Patreon if you want to support me. 'Cause I have my own kind of stuff inside.
Next show will be Sunday. Check out get ready for next show. Who knows what the topic is? I don't know.
I do.
Who knows?
But if you join the
Really?
Patreon, you could actually be a part of.
Actually,
I'll
yeah,
do this
that's
one more
true. If you
topic.
join the Patreon, you can actually
Yeah.
vote on the topics.
Yeah, that's true, John. I'm happy.
That is true. It's
Yeah.
not like I made
Did
it
you
or
know that if you
anything.
join the Patreon, you can actually be part of choosing the next topic?
Not like I made it or anything. Oh, it's not like I had.
It's a good thing I was actually part here to listen to it.
You know what?
You're welcome.
so sassy.
Can we call the Minion Hub the lair or
teamwork.
the hideout?
The
Oh, I love it.
Oh,
Basement.
it's too late now, but it should be.
Well, we can change it.
Bye.
Thanks for watching.
Goodbye.
Thanks for watching.
Why?